Hi, I'm Joe Stark, creator of the fantasy adventure series The Unscarred. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Now, on to the show.
On the world of Faereyas, a god made flesh is born every 500 years. These beings are known as the Chosen, but the world will come to call one of them the Unscarred. The Unscarred, written by Joe Stark.
Chapter 13 Hawk's Flight. Before. Hawk's eyes drank in the vision before her. A waterfall cascaded from a granite cliff that towered above her, its water crashing to the rocks below and erupting in a thunderous spray of mist. It rose gently through the air and was refracted by the sunlight, creating a rainbow. Hawk closed her eyes and committed the image to memory. All of 11 years old, she had just decided that this was the best day of her life. "We have to come back here someday," exclaimed Hawk. "Hoke, did you see the rainbow?" she asked her brother excitedly. Hoke smiled and nodded. "Yeah, I saw it, Hawk." His sister's exuberance had been a welcome distraction during the day's hike through the mountains. The trail proved as challenging as the scenery was beautiful. Though Hoke's legs and lungs burned from the effort, he was unable to dwell on thoughts of failure due to Hawk's palpable enthusiasm at every new sight, influencing him through their shared mental connection. Hoke closed his eyes and sighed with fatigue as he felt the cooling spray of the falls dampen his face. "Don't go falling asleep on me now," snapped Hawk. Hoke opened his eyes and yawned. "I'm awake, just resting my eyes." "Sorry, Hoke. I know you're tired. I'm just so excited to see beyond the walls of the tower. The world is full of adventure and beauty, just like we always imagined," said Hawk wistfully. "Just like we always imagined," echoed Hoke. A shrill voice pierced the tranquility. "Hawk!" it shrieked. Hawk opened her eyes and regarded the figure seated opposite her. "Yes, Margaret?" "You have been distant all day," scolded Margaret. "Where were you just now?" Hawk smiled. "With Hoke. He's resting beside a beautiful waterfall in the mountains to the north." Margaret pursed her lips. "Well, I need your focus here, in Terransay. Have you heard a single word I've said?" "I'm sorry, Margaret," said Hawk. "It's just that Hoke is seeing all of these amazing sights, and all I ever see is the tower. When can I go on a grand adventure?" "Oh, Hawk," said Margaret. "I know you feel it is unfair that your brother gets to leave while you must stay behind, but you must consider your duty as heiress of Kalan. You are the most precious resource of Terransay. One day, through your guidance, we will better understand the arcane arts we practice. Protecting you safeguards our future, child." Hawk crossed her arms. "If I'm the most powerful, then I can protect myself," she declared. Margaret nodded in patient understanding. "One day, that will be true, child, but today, you must study." Hawk sighed in defeat and returned her attention to the book laying open on the table in front of her. If she was to leave one day, she must be the strongest. Only then would they let her go. Hawk clenched her jaw in determination and resumed her studies with a renewed vigor. Now. "That's the short version of it anyway," finished Hawk. "Any questions?" Eric glanced at Peary. The trio were seated around a small table within Peary's room. Hoke was sprawled out on a divan, fast asleep. Hawk, after making her introduction, had performed a spell on her brother, healing his stab wound. The would-be assassin lay bound and gagged against the far wall, still unconscious. Peary made a tent with his fingers before his face. "You were seeing through Hoke's eyes and hearing through his ears," said Peary. "That's right," replied Hawk. "He was in trouble and I reacted. If I can see through Hoke's eyes, I can jump into the physical space around him." "Incredible!" exclaimed Peary. "Can you travel anywhere at will with this power?" Hawk shook her head. "Not quite that simple, I'm afraid. I'm jumping to a place I've seen in our shared minds. An adept in this art can transport themselves if they've memorized a pattern, but it's safer to see the places that exist the moment you jump, or you risk jumping into a solid object and merging with it. That can range from instant painful death to horrifically maimed. Not good options." "What about your thoughts? Do you share those as well?" asked Peary. "Oh, gods no!" exclaimed Hawk. "Can you imagine how awful that would be, sharing every constant thought with somebody else? That would absolutely end in a murder," she laughed. Peary chuckled. "That explains the Farron's habit of talking to himself. Will he survive?" Hawk nodded. "He'll be fine. All he needs now is rest." Peary smiled and shook his head. "The mystic arts never cease to amaze me. In this place you speak of, this Terran Say, it sounds incredible." "It is our hope to build a future where you could come and visit," said Hawk, placing her hand over Peary's. "Hoke can be stubbornly secretive at times, but I prefer plain speech. The soul-bonding enchantment reaped much in rewards for my people. At the height of the Farron Kingdom's history, we maintained lines of contact between the cities and acted as envoys to foreign lands." "And are you an envoy now?" asked Peary. Hawk nodded. "Yes, we seek an end to the Pirate King's reign in Kartu." "Toward what end? What is it you seek within Karis Fawn?" asked Peary. "Not within Karis Fawn, but through it," replied Hawk. Looking to Eric, she continued, "We seek your land, Eric. We seek entry to the verdant valleys. Farron unrest is fomented by a lack of leadership. Our last true king died in this very forest centuries ago." "Our lore also tells this story," said Peary. "It is a cautionary tale of Farron treachery. For generations, the Ka and Farron peoples had lived and traded in peace. And then came war. War brought to our home by the Farrons. Your job as an envoy will not be an easy one." Hawk continued, "I'm not an emissary sent to the Ka, but to the verdant valleys. After the passing of King Thenan, his son and only heir, Chiron, left Faerra. It was written that a dream was experienced by all, the great dreaming. The morning after, Chiron, along with many others, were simply gone. The throne room in the citadel of Kartu magically sealed itself. Runes carved into the immense stones bespoke of a time when the door would once again open, either upon the hand of or upon the death of the last heir of Chiron. A prophecy. The would-be kings that followed placed their thrones before the great doors as a symbol of connection to the past, but the damage to the kingdom was done. Too many powerful and influential rulers had been lost in the war. Faerra was fractured beyond repair. At least that has been the prevailing belief for many hundreds of years. But I don't believe the throne room's runes are a prophecy at all. It's a spell, an enchantment that stands to this day because the throne room is still sealed. Do you understand the significance?" she asked. Eric nodded. "Chiron's line hasn't ended. His heir yet lives." Hawk slapped her palm down on the table. "Exactly, or the doors would have opened. The only question now is, where did Chiron go? We have maps, though of course none of them show the verdant valleys. Simple process of elimination points us beyond the northern mountains. Our search of the western flanks has brought us here," finished Hawk. Eric's head swam. Fate had seen fit to bring him to this place. Clearly he was to play a role in the coming events, though he didn't yet fully understand his place. "The entrance to the verdant valleys is shrouded by an enchantment. It cannot be found on this side of the mountains. Even if we could find a way inside, you believe your countrymen will truly rally around a foreigner?" asked Eric. "If the door opens at his touch, they will follow. Farrons have suffered under the hands of little tyrants for too long," said Hawk. "They are ready for their true king." Eric nodded. "I want to help you, Hawk." He looked to Peary. "But I also must help the Ka." "Eric, this would stop the violence. Would that not be helping the Ka?" asked Hawk. "Over 3,000 years ago, at the dawn of the Second Age, it is said that a Farron came to us. He claimed to be following the will of the Creator, which led him to us in our time of need," said Peary. "Ian the Herald," said Eric quietly, "the first chosen." Hawk gave Eric a serious look. "Like you." "Why are you here, Eric?" asked Peary. "During the battle, when I faced Zaren's Chaos Mage, visions came to me, and a voice that urged me to come here to Karas Din and right the wrongs of the past. I think it's the reason I'm here, said Eric. I was led to this place by feelings and dreams. I can't explain it, but it just feels right that I'm here. Eric sighed. I grew up on the streets of Lant, the capital city of the verdant valleys. I was an orphan and life was hard. I had to fight for my survival. When I was 10 years old, I found the Order of the Creator. The monks took me in and trained me as a monk. For many years, I believed that I'd finally found my place, but it was not to be. I was pushed away. That place had begun to feel wrong to me, wrong in my very being. I was not meant to be there. That feeling disappeared when I met the Ka. This is where I'm supposed to be right now. A groan issued from the bound and gagged would-be assassin on the floor. Puri rolled the man over and removed his gag. Who are you? He asked the man. The man said nothing as he stared blankly at Puri. Eric tentatively reached out and placed his hand upon the prisoner. A cold shock ran up his arm. He withdrew his hand and stared intently into the man's eyes. There was something amiss with this man, he said. As Eric stared into the assassin's unblinking eyes, he noticed a darkness. At first imperceptible, the darkness soon grew and encompassed the man's entire body in a haze. After a moment, the image of the man disappeared entirely, and in its place was the shadow of a man. He is full of shadows, said Eric. Quintus, replied Puri. He's a shadow mage, but this is beyond what I understand of his abilities. There is much you fail to understand, poison eater, said the assassin. The man's head turned violently and broke with a sickening crack. He fell to the floor. Puri knelt and checked the assassin's pulse. He's dead. Eric leaned against the bookshelf. This was Quintus? Puri stood. It was not his voice at the last, but those were his words. Is this normal behavior? Asked Eric. Hawk raised her hand. The attempted assassination, or the casual conversation over a corpse? I, for one, don't wish to be here when his bowel's empty. Puri opened his mouth to reply, but stopped short as Eric raised a finger. He's gone. Hawk and Puri looked to the floor. The body was now gone. Where'd it go? Asked Hawk. Outside the city, said Eric. We have enough to deal with right now. He turned toward Puri. Now, is Quintus generally so bold as to send an assassin into your quarters? Puri shook his head. Never. He has never openly attacked me. Earlier in the council chambers, he promised to take your brother's head, said Eric, glancing at Hawk. I don't like it, said Puri. Hawk chuckled. Puri shook his head. Well, obviously, but I meant his behavior. Quintus wouldn't make a move like that unless he were sure of his position, as well as being damn sure that Eric is a fool for claiming himself to be the Unscarred. It's an unknowable sum. Then something else? Asked Eric. You called him a shadow mage, but said the power we saw earlier was beyond him. Puri nodded. Certainly, never at this level before. It was my understanding that his powers were better suited for the amusement of children. Eric sighed. Then all we have is speculation. He sat himself cross-legged on the floor. I'm going to meditate now. Please rouse me when it is time to see the council, said Eric as he closed his eyes. Yes, said Puri, and I will ensure we receive no further guests this evening. Hawk crossed the room to the bookshelf. She scanned over the titles. I may skim through some of these if you don't mind. Puri gave a short bow. You are my guest. May I ask you another question about your powers? Hawk gave a small smile and settled into a nearby chair. What have you got? Dense patches of fog swirled in the moonlight. The moisture-laden air dampened the sound of footfalls, breaking the otherwise unnerving quiet that surrounded the pillars of the dead. Quintus opened the shutter on his lantern. He squinted his eyes in a willful attempt to pierce the inky veil of darkness. When he was satisfied that he was alone, he lowered himself into a seated position, his back against the petrified remains of an ancient stonewood tree. Quintus watched the flickering flame within his lantern as he withdrew a small vial from his sleeve. My Lady of Shadows, please speak to me again, said Quintus. He opened the vial, allowing a drop of liquid to form along the slender rod of glass embedded within the cork. Once again, I seek your guidance and your power. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like, share, and leave a 5-star review for the show. If you would like a copy of The Unscarred, please see the Amazon link in the show notes. Hardcover, paperback, and digital copies are all available right now. And if you want to email the show, Hit me up at erictheunscarred@gmail.com.